Imagine Rome at the height of its power. Legions marching through Gaul, Hispania, Greece, North Africa, and the Near East, and everywhere the same message seems to apply. Rome comes, Rome sees, Rome conquers. Cities fall, kings kneel, roads cut through the provinces like stone arteries, and even mighty empires learn that resisting this machine usually means only delaying the inevitable. If Rome wanted something, it took it. Slowly perhaps, brutally without question, but almost always permanently. Yet north of the Rhine lay a region that escaped Roman logic. There was no unified kingdom, no splendid capital, no single ruler whose defeat would decide everything, but instead a vast, fragmented world of tribes, forests, swamps, and rivers. What was Rome even supposed to seize there, when the land itself kept slipping through its fingers? The Romans were masters of order, and that was precisely their weakness here. They loved roads, surveying, depots, fixed marching routes, clear chains of command, and cities as anchor points of their rule. But Germania offered something else. Wet ground, unpredictable weather, dense forests, sudden bottlenecks, and a landscape that mocked every straight line. Here the terrain was not scenery, it was an enemy. The Roman army could fight almost anywhere, but it had to be supplied. Grain, fodder, tools, replacement weapons, draft animals, bridge materials, and messages had to keep moving, day after day, week after week, and for exactly that Rome needed security behind its lines. Germania offered instead uncertainty in every direction, and the deeper a legion marched into it, the more the world it relied on disappeared behind it. In Gaul, Rome could take cities and absorb elites. In Greece, it could make use of existing structures, and in the East, it could negotiate with ancient centers of power or destroy them. Beyond the Rhine, however, there were only loose tribal confederations, shifting alliances and settlements, whose loss would not cause an entire region to collapse. You could burn down a village and still wake up the next morning to find that the war had only just begun. Julius Caesar himself had crossed the Rhine, and of course he did so with great drama. He had bridges built, demonstrated power, and drove back enemies. But even Caesar treated these campaigns more as displays of force and punitive expeditions than as the completed conquest of a lasting new core territory. That alone tells you a great deal. Even the boldest Romans sensed that different rules applied here. Then came Augustus, and with him, ambition grew. After the civil wars, he wanted to secure the frontiers, increase his glory, and ideally turn the vague space between the Rhine and the Elbe into a Roman province, neatly ordered, taxable, and controlled. It was not a mad plan, at least not on paper, because Roman armies advanced far, legates built camps, and some tribes appeared ready to adapt. For a time, it even looked as though Rome might tame this land as well. Military camps were established, Roman administration began to edge forward, local leaders were courted, and the illusion grew that Germania could be integrated into the empire step by step, just like Gaul. It is exactly at moments like this, when empires believe they have already won, that the real danger often begins. At the center of this dangerous self-deception stood Publius Quinctilius Varus. He was not an incompetent man, but he thought like an administrator in a region that could not yet be administered, and that is precisely what blinded him. Where he saw subjects, there lived people who might negotiate, but who had not forgotten that behind every Roman treaty lurked Roman domination. And then there was Arminius, one of the most fascinating figures of this age. From the Roman point of view, he was not some alien barbarian, but a man who knew Rome, had served in Roman ranks, and understood exactly how legions marched, how officers thought, and where their sense of security truly ended. If you want to defeat Rome, it helps enormously to have learned from Rome first. In the autumn of the year 9 AD, the catastrophe began to unfold. Varus led 3 legions, along with auxiliaries, baggage train, and followers, through difficult terrain, while Arminius in the background forged an alliance and lured the Romans deeper into a trap. What followed was not a clean field battle on open ground, but the multi-day tearing apart of an entire army. Rain lashed down, paths turned into mud, wagons got stuck, units lost cohesion, and from forest and mist attacks kept breaking out again and again. The Romans could scarcely deploy their classic strengths because they were not in proper formation, could not maneuver freely, and in many places resembled a long, vulnerable column rather than an organized army. Here the earth itself attacked, through narrowness, wetness, chaos, and fear. In the region we now associate with the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, it was not only soldiers who died. A Roman dream was shattered there, because with Varus's legions vanished eagles, officers, experience, prestige, and the sense that everything north of the Rhine could ultimately be controlled. 3 legions were lost, and with them something even more valuable perished: Roman certainty. Later tradition tells that Augustus cried out in despair, calling on Varus to give him back his legions. Whether every word was spoken exactly that way matters almost not at all, because the core of it is true. The shock in Rome was enormous. An empire that imposed order on other peoples had suddenly discovered that its own power, too, had limits. Of course, that did not mean Rome never fought in Germania again. Under Germanicus, Roman armies crossed the Rhine once more, defeated opponents, recovered the remains of the fallen, and retrieved lost standards. And in military terms, they proved that the Romans were still terrifyingly strong. Strength alone is not the same as rule, and that is exactly the decisive point. Because even after victories, the underlying problem remained unchanged. You could defeat Germanic warriors in battle, burn villages, and take hostages, but you could not intimidate forests, bribe marshes, or turn endless spaces into a stable province with a single triumph. Every advance consumed time, money, lives, and nerves, and every retreat gave the land its teeth back. There was also a sober Roman calculation, one often more important than glory. Was it worth it at all? Provinces were supposed to bring tribute, secure trade routes, open access to resources, or control strategic corridors. But free Germania east of the Rhine promised high costs, uncertain returns, and a permanent military burden. Why keep pushing deeper into such a region when the Rhine itself offered a perfectly usable frontier? Compare this with Rome's other hard wars. In Hispania, the Romans fought bitterly. In Britannia, they faced rain, cold, and fierce resistance. And in the Alps or the East, they also knew dangerous landscapes. But there, in the end, they more often found fixed centers of power, expandable cities, or clearer political levers. In Germania, by contrast, even victory often felt like grasping at fog. You had won, but what exactly did you permanently hold in your hand? There was also the psychological effect this frontier region had on the legionaries. A soldier fears open battle, but he fears the invisible even more. And north of the Rhine, an attack could be waiting behind every tree, every bend, and every muddy choke point. If order was Rome's greatest strength, then constant uncertainty was the poison that slowly dissolved that order. And the consequences reached far beyond a single disaster. In Roman thinking, the Rhine increasingly became a true frontier, not merely a river that would soon be left behind. And with that, the strategic map of Europe was altered for centuries. Sometimes a lost army decides more than a campaign. Sometimes it decides where one world ends and another begins. This is exactly what makes the subject so fascinating, because Rome was not held back by people alone, but by an interplay of geography, climate, and society. Rivers split marching routes. Swamps slowed columns. Forests swallowed visibility and order. Winters devoured supplies, and the political fragmentation of the tribes prevented the one final blow, after which everything would have been over. The land itself fought, and that may be the real answer to the question of why Rome never truly conquered this land. Rome was built to concentrate power, occupy key nodes, and then translate a defeated territory into roads, taxes, and garrisons. But Germania escaped precisely that logic. There, fragmentation was not just a weakness, it was also protection. If one tribe yielded, another kept fighting. If one settlement was abandoned, the whole political order did not vanish, because in many cases, there was no central order that could be beheaded with a single strike. For Rome, this was frustrating, expensive, and dangerous, because every apparent success could simply be another step into even more uncertain terrain. That is why, in the long run, The empire chose something that almost looks like an admission of defeat, but was in truth sheer realism. Rome fortified the Rhine and the Danube, built frontier defenses, controlled crossings, and preferred to create a hard edge between province and free territory, rather than wear itself down in an endless war against terrain, weather, and mobility. Not every frontier of an empire is a launching pad. Some are a warning. And yet the fascination remained. Again and again there were Roman incursions, punitive expeditions, alliances, trade contacts, and spheres of influence. And of course the frontier was never completely sealed. The great dream of a lasting, deep Romanization beyond the Rhine essentially died with the failure of the early conquest project. Rome could strike, burn, and punish, but it could not turn this region into something that reliably belonged to Rome. Perhaps that is precisely where the greatness of this story lies. It shows you that even the most powerful empire of antiquity was not all-powerful, and that discipline, steel, and drill can sometimes fail against something that looks harmless on a map. Terrain. A swamp wears no crown, a forest gives no speeches, and yet both can be deadlier than a king. So when you think of Rome, do not think only of triumphal arches, marching columns, and the splendor of eternal victories. Think also of cold rain over narrow paths, of men in heavy equipment sinking into the mire, of unseen enemies behind trees, and of officers suddenly realizing that their training has not prepared them for everything. Because there, between the Rhine, the marsh, and the forest, Rome itself did not end. But the idea that Rome must triumph everywhere did. In the end, the land Rome could never conquer is neither legend nor some magical place. It is a real frontier zone where nature, distance, logistics, tribal politics, and determined resistance came together and turned an apparently conquerable land into a lasting problem.